Welcome, everybody, to Service Over Self. My name is Brent Carmichael. I have the pleasure of being here with my good friend, Henry Saxon.
How we doing, everybody?
All right, so we're back at it again. We want to welcome all of our listeners and thank you again for being supportive. We hope that we are able to encourage, motivate, and give a little bit of information about service over self and why we're doing this podcast. So today's conversation is, how do we help and encourage and empower those marginalized groups? Some of those marginalized groups like the special needs, the homeless, veterans, those that have been incarcerated, our youth, all those people who are groups that we need to encourage more to get into the service industry.
Yeah, I think this topic is particularly interesting to me because, most of us who are engaged in community service, in selfless conduct for our communities, just being people of color, our proximity to the marginalized communities are, that's our default, right? That's where we automatically go. So, we don't do a whole lot of things that I would imagine really outside of marginal communities because for most of us, we lived it ourselves and or we know folks who are unfortunately might be in that space or certainly have family and friends that unfortunately might still be in that space. So I think it's in our environment,
Yes.
and certainly so it's understandable that having some sensitivity toward working with marginalized groups is so important. What we wanted to do today was to basically share some insights about working with marginalized groups. I don't really like labels, but we want to be able to help and support your engagement in communities in which we serve marginalized populations.
And I'm with you on the whole marginalized thing. I when I thought about it and looked at, what would be one of the topics, I kind of cringed a little bit when I did talk about marginalized. But again, I think for the sake of having this conversation, we'll use it. But when I think about it, what are the reasons, or one of the initial reasons that I wanted to have this discussion was improving our social cohesion. As a people, we need to start working together. We have to be including everyone. And as we know, there's a big push, right now, among some of us in this society, of saying that, diversity, equity, inclusion is not important. But when you talk about marginalized groups, those are the ones that get hit the hardest, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. And again, labels are, I don't think, helpful in a lot of these conversations because we tend to use deficit language in describing these kinds of topics. So let's not buy into that.
Yes,
let's
sir.
just not
I
buy
agree.
into it.
I agree because to me, I want every person that is listening or every person that we can touch to feel valued, to feel included, and know that, we are here speaking to everyone in an effort to be able to help them get through some of the things that they're going through.
Yeah. Well, let me just, give some of my thoughts on how we target people or services or environments that are under-resourced, right? And for whatever reason.
Yes.
Just under-resourced.
Right.
And none of us want to see anybody label or labor unnecessarily or unfairly just to have a decent quality of life. So understand that society as a whole can't get away from labels, and I don't think it's appropriate. But if you are interested in supporting your brother or sister or institution that is under-resourced, let's talk about it.
Yes, I think one of the big words that I want to encourage us all to start using more is empowering. We want to be able to empower everyone. And that means getting to know them, building relationships with them. The one thing, I think back to some of the people who helped raise me in my community were some of the guys that we may have felt was in that marginalized group. But they had some of the brightest wisdom for you. And so I learned a lot. And so we've gotten away from listening and understanding and helping those individuals get their words out.
Yeah, particularly when you start out working with in these communities and with these groups, you have to understand. You have to understand, and you have to do more listening than talking. Sometimes there's this, I don't know, there's this instinct to go in with you thinking you have all of the answers and the solutions.
Yes.
I don't understand that, and I know it's probably in good faith, but when you work with people or communities that you don't have much engagement with, listen more than you talk.
Yes, I just want to kind of go back to the historical perspectives of, you think about our ancestors and how they were marginalized and not appreciated and wasn't able to speak and do things. I believe, when you talk about service over self, we have a moral responsibility to help the groups that we feel are not getting all the support services that they need.
I think it's biblical. I think we are absolutely expected to pay it forward.
Yes.
And to sponsor, to the extent that we can, folks who are a little bit lower on the ladder than we are. I know I had a mentor who used to say, hey, listen, when your elevator reaches the top floor, send it back down.
Yes.
Send it back down.
Yes, sir. And you think, again, about some of the systematic inequalities that happen. I even look back, in my elementary days when we lived in the projects and people looked down on us. The funny thing is, and I'm just going to throw this in just for a little humor, back when we used to have holes in our jeans, it meant you were poor. Now it means that you're rich. Mm-hmm. But when you think back about the systematic inequalities that we all face, we just want those groups to be able to have a level playing field.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm reminded of a movie. I won't say the movie's name, but the dialogue was a couple of the characters were talking, and he had just gotten out of jail or prison, and he was reflecting on his time in prison and how supportive his friends were, during his time in prison. And he was talking, and the dialogue said, yeah, man, I appreciate you guys. We all go back to free lunch. But, I identified with that.
Yes,
I absolutely identified with
yes.
that. And he had some appreciation and nostalgia for the struggle, mm-hmm. and the camaraderie these guys had in the struggle.
Mm-hmm. I think, again, when I think about groups that I would love to encourage to get into the service industry and being able to tell their story are those that have been incarcerated. Yeah. Because I could recall having conversations with young men who had been incarcerated, and they came out and, they couldn't find jobs, and they couldn't, So what I had encouraged them to do is, try to get connected to a church or a community center and tell your story.
Yeah.
Let people listen to your story and what you've gone through, because your message will resonate. And so, to me, that's a group that I think, when you talk about injustices, we all make mistakes. We all made mistakes, and some are costly. But, I think we have a forgiving God.
Yeah.
And so I think I would love for us to be able to encourage some of those that have incarcerated to use their platform.
Let me ask you a question. If someone was really, really interested in working with, for the sake of this conversation, marginalized groups, how would you suggest that they get started? What kinds of assets that you think they need to build? What kind of perspective you think they need to bring into serving marginalized groups?
First thing is an awareness. I think, go back to the old statement, how can you be something you know nothing about? And I think when you think about someone with special needs, or a person that is a veteran, or again, someone who has been incarcerated, you have to learn. You have to listen and quit talking and listen, and build that relationship by allowing them to share their feelings, to share what things that you can learn from it. Because in order to get them to understand you, build that trust, you have to be able to allow them to be able to speak their mind. So that's the first thing I think we need to do is, learn to listen more than talk.
Absolutely. That can't be overstated. I would add to your point and maybe it's the same point you just made, said another way, but we need to have cultural intelligence.
Yes.
About these communities, and we can't just go with what the internet says or rumor and innuendo. We need to have cultural intelligence, and I also believe you need to have an outcome in mind. We just can't be volunteering and be involved with this work just to satisfy our own benevolent interest. We need to have some very specific outcomes in mind. So if you're going to mentor a young man or a woman, or if you're going to help clothe children in a certain community, have an outcome, have some decisive difference that you really want to make, be committed to it.
And the reality is, at some point they're going to have to do something to provide some income. And so, when you think about learning from them, but them also learning from you, and being able to be a part of the economic development of their neighborhood or their city, just by being, having that mentality of service over self. Because you're going to meet people, you're going to find resources, you're going to be able to build bonds, and which may lead you to that good job. That's that outcome you're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't necessarily subscribe to the notion that, hey, my efforts are going to be fruitless because we can't boil the ocean, right? The problem is too big. I just don't believe that.
No,
I just don't believe that. I believe that, to whom much is given, much is expected. And, and if we need to sponsor a situation, if we need to make sure, as I said earlier, a certain individual or a certain area of a community is taken care of, I think we need to stay committed to it until it's done.
Yes, I look back on myself, Sax. I mean, when you think about, the growth and I had the pleasure of playing professional basketball, but why I played, I was going to schools and talking to kids about the importance of education, volunteering, giving my time back. By doing that, I met some really good people. And in meeting those good people, I picked up some really good jobs once I got done. And so, that's why I believe that in doing this podcast with you is because, you know, my career explosion or career growth all came from me going to schools and talking to kids about the importance of education.
Yeah, I agree. Let's shift the conversation a little bit towards some specific things that all of us listening and having the conversation around what are some real things that we can do to reverse the trends in some resource challenged communities. And one of the things that comes to mind is if you wanted to volunteer in this space, I'll just rip off a few that comes to mind. One is community resource awareness. There are tons of really, really good nonprofits up there that's in the fight, that's in the arena,
Yes.
that need support.
Yes.
If you're so inclined, maybe we should think about trying to help those organizations raise the dollars, raise the resources that they need to function adequately in communities like that.
Yeah, I would. What I would like to see too is a one stop, and I can't say shop, but one stop area marketing or information highway that we could be able to combine those resources and let people know where they are, how to get them, what ways to be able to address them or be able to be a part of them. And so I think, again, as our community tries to move forward and build those bonds, I think we only try to use our phones, but sometimes we don't have immediate access or know how to get to those organizations.
Yeah, you said something at the top of the podcast that resonated with me. I think you used the word empowerment.
Yes. Yes.
With respect to this topic, and I think you're absolutely right. So if you're an individual that wants to champion maybe some of the unfairness or inequality you see in marginalized groups, advocacy is a good approach if you feel so inclined, and to help give voice to the voiceless.
Yes.
Especially if you are a person of means and capacity, it doesn't hurt at all getting in the ear of stakeholders and people that can make a difference. It's nothing more empowering to a community to know that there's a bunch of caring citizens that got their back.
Well, when you said advocacy, I stood up in my chair because, of course, me having a special needs child, I've been his advocate since he's 3.5. And so, and coming from where I came from, I absolutely knew nothing about special needs, special education, or anything. And so, I had to learn all of it pretty much on my own. And so when you talk about advocacy, we have to advocate for our groups that are not being advocated wisely for. Because, like you said, the voiceless, my son could not speak for himself, but there were some inequalities that were going on in the school, and I had to address them. And so we definitely need to be advocates for the groups that we're talking about today.
Yeah, I just think, I think that's an important position to hold. And we'll talk about this subject in future podcasts, but getting involved with some of these institutions who profess to be working in marginalized communities, get involved at the leadership level, like on boards of directors and advisors to these organizations, so that they can be held accountable for doing the work. In some cases, they're being funded to do it, and having advocates for the constituents that are being served to ensure some of these nonprofits and other, institutions that supposedly are working in this space, I think is important as well. And coming from a nonprofit background, I can see and I can tell you the benefit in having that kind of accountability.
So when I think about what you're saying and talking about getting the corporate people involved, I kind of think that as building our social capital, being able to have the resources readily available for groups that need this, because it's not like we don't have it available. It's there. We just got to use it. And we got to get connected, get people connected, encourage teamwork. One of the things that I've always had a little thing with, as far as United Way does a lot of great things, and I'm very encouraged by United Way and the things that they do. But a lot of people are fighting for that same money. And so in fighting for that same money, people need numbers. So the YMCA may have a bus, but the Boys and Girls Club doesn't have a bus. The YMCA is not going to let them use that bus because they need the numbers. And so it's a fight sometimes in order to get us to work as teams to be able to do that. So and I know this conversation is longer than what we have today, but I just wanted to bring that up because we have to utilize our social capital.
Yeah, I've seen those dynamics for a very long time working. You're right. That's a whole another show. But what I will say though is that we need champions. Yes. And the biggest problem I see, and I think this should uplift those of you out there that are really interested in this topic, is we have the resources. Mm-hmm. What we're lacking is the will. Yeah, we're lacking is the will. There just needs to be a level of conscientiousness to recognize that some of these situations are unacceptable. Mm-hmm. When I think, you can talk about, youth development needs or homelessness or hunger. Pick your social problem. Mm-hmm. This is a very, very one of the richest, if not the richest, nation on the face of this earth, and we can deal with and finance any social problem. It's the will, in my view. It's we just need to muster the will and the resolve to take care of some of these social issues.
So I'd like to get your take on something that has always kind of been on my mind, and I think that I've driven myself to the point that I am this kind of a person. So why do you think that we spend more time talking about the problem than solutions?
I think it's leadership. Mm-hmm. I think it's leadership. Anytime you have circumstances like that, you really have to question the capacity of the leader. Mm. Now, it could be
good point.
It could be that the leader just does not have the skill set, mm-hmm. or they don't have, as I said earlier, the resolve. Mm-hmm. But either way, it's a deficit of leadership.
Yes. When I and the reason I asked that is because it took me, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, I don't know, maybe longer, that I kept tossing and turning about the problem. And I stay up all night thinking about a solution. And I'm like, okay, how can I stop some of this? So I cut out thinking about the problem and just start worrying about solutions. So when I took the job at Waterloo East High School as the intervention specialist in the administrative piece, so anybody that got in trouble had to come see me. So first thing they come in is with the problem. First thing I'm thinking about is solution. I dealt with the problem, but I was more worried about what is the solution. And what I did is gave kids solutions instead of talking about the issue. And that's how I think I address and want to address our audience in saying, let's think of solutions. We know the problems. Let's think of some solutions.
I think that's a great point. And I would probably shift that same perspective to our peers, right?
Yes.
And, we love our friends and we love our families, but let's be honest, everybody doesn't share the same level of commitment and consciousness toward serving other people.
Yes.
But in my mind, listen, you can't complain about problems in society when you have no interest in doing something about it.
Right.
It's just not a valid take to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you can't, you just can't throw rocks at it, and so, but that happens quite often.
I mean, you complain about some things and then don't vote. Yeah. I mean, it's the same kind of scenario or same kind of situation is that, we talk about homeless, but what are we doing for the homeless? We talk about, proper education for our special needs kids, but what are we doing really inside the school helping families with IEPs or 504 plans? So I agree with you 100% on that, Sax, and I think we have to be, and the reason why we started this podcast is to get messages like that out here.
Yeah, I think, we all have an opportunity to make a difference, particularly in communities where either they weren't dealt a fair hand or the people in some of these situations weren't dealt a fair hand, or if they fall down for a reason, I think everybody should be redeemed.
Yes.
And so on the other side of the same coin, I think, being conscientious about others and communities that are not as fortunate as the ones that we might come to know, we just got to do something about it, folks. Yeah. And that's the big idea here.
And one area and I think and I hope that down the road we bring this as a topic down the road, that what service over self or serving others can do to our mental health. Being able to help groups that are being underserved, but it also helps your mind and puts you in a good, happy place in being able to know that you've helped somebody and improve your own mental health. So I think down the road, I would love for that to be one of our conversations.
Yeah, we certainly can explore that. But as we wind down this podcast, I want to restate some ways that our listeners that are really conscious about making a difference in, I hate using the word, but in under-resourced communities.
Good point, Zach.
And so do your homework, do your due diligence, find out the facts, look at the data. And I'm not going to tell you, which area has more need than another area, but whatever your heart leads you to do, get involved. Now, if there are other institutions on the ground there, then help them build capacity is one avenue. If you feel that there is no representation, then advocate for better outcomes for folks that are in these situations. But think it through, and but there are definitely ways you can make a difference.
Be the change.
Yeah, be
the change.
Definitely ways you can make it.
Yes, be the change. We encourage you all to listen to us. We thank you so much for your time, and please be the change. Thank you for listening.